Hello, and thanks for joining me. I'm Deb Calvert, and this is the Deb Calvert channel on Bright Talk. I really appreciate you being here. I want to give you a few introductory comments about using this platform for those of you who are new. First of all, I've already had one question today, and I hope you'll post lots and lots of questions. The one I'm hearing now is that you aren't seeing the slides. Normally I post a PDF of the slides, and sometimes people come in and download those during the presentation. So I'm not sure why that isn't there. I apologize, but if you will just let me know. You can put a comment right here, or you can email me afterwards. I'll be happy to send you the slides later. They're just not in the attachments. So there are lots of other things, though, in the attachments. If you're new to Bright Talk, you might not know that that's one of the best parts of this platform, is that I can load you up with bonus content, and I have today. There are a number of attachments and links, places where you can go to get additional information about some of the topics that I'll just be touching on lightly today. One of the ones I know for sure that you'll want to get connected to is the free email training for emerging leaders. So if you have emerging leaders and you're wondering how to support or help them, this is one thing that I know will be high value. It's email training. It's a light introduction to leadership at every level, and it changes the way people think about themselves and about how they can step into their full potential as leaders. So anyways, take a look there. I'm Deb Calvert, and I conduct monthly webinars on topics that are of interest for managers and especially people in HR. I have a background with the Fortune 500 as a corporate director. My role there was HR, and I've also spent my entire career in sales, which is a unique combination. But I do a lot of work with leadership development and a lot of shadow consulting to help small and mid-sized businesses mainly in developing their leaders. So I'd like to connect with you. If you have any needs like what I've just described, or managers and HR folks, connect with me on LinkedIn, subscribe to this channel, sign up for our Connect to Lead newsletter. We load up weekly content there too, and we never spam people, so I think you'll enjoy being part of our community. Okay, enough about me, enough about Bright Talk. Just know that there are lots of things here. Poke around and explore. It's a great platform. Let's dive into the topic today. We're talking about three things: how to identify, how to retain, and how to motivate your emerging leaders. So I thought it would make sense to start with a definition of an emerging leader. It's a term that gets thrown around a whole lot, and I thought we should frame up what I'm describing when I say emerging leader. I think first it's useful to address some of the misperceptions. Some people would say an emerging leader is someone who's brand new to management. And, well, I don't think those terms, new manager and emerging leader, I don't think those are necessarily synonymous, because someone can be a manager without showing leadership, and someone can demonstrate leadership abilities without ever having any title or authority. So we first have to address that misperception. An emerging leader is someone who is beginning to show up in ways that others notice. It's someone who is rising in stature or showing you something that causes you to pay attention to them. And a leader, well, that term, its word origin is actually Latin, and that original word meant to guide. Leaders, no matter what their role, they guide people. They take people to new places. They show people the way. They influence people, and others willingly choose to follow them because of something that they see in that person. So I'd like you to think very broadly about the people in your organization who are already leaders. Regardless of their title, you've got some folks who are influencing others. And if to develop so that you can eventually formalize that, perhaps give them a title or give them additional responsibilities, well, then they'd also be managers. And of course, yes, there also are people in management roles, frontline supervisors all the way up to the C-suite, people who are in senior management, mid-level management, new to management. They might also be leaders, but there's no guarantee. One of the misperceptions is that we tend to call the people at the very top of the org chart leaders, and everybody else gets called managers, and that's simply not accurate. We want it to be accurate. We want the people at the top to be leaders who guide others, but there's no automatic gimme here. Some other misperceptions. I also think this whole notion of emerging leader, well, that's not about age. Oftentimes people think of this as being something that's for millennials or 30 and under or some other artificial bucketing. But emerging leaders, that's not meant to be a narrow age-based definition. People can emerge as leaders very early in their career, or for some reason it might be later in their career. So let's think of that broadly and not let age be a constraint. You might have a lot more emerging leader potential in your organization than you realize if you've put some of those narrowing thoughts around what that term even means. If you're interested in reading more about emerging leaders and who is an emerging leader, I've given you a link in the attachments there. And that link is to an article that I posted on LinkedIn quite a while back, but it's gotten a lot of traction. People seem to enjoy that one. So take a look at that article. And it's called 10 Signs You Could Be an Emerging Leader. Okay, so let's keep talking about what this is. What is an emerging leader? And why should you focus on emerging leaders and their development? That's a big, important question. Here's the short answer. The reason that you should focus on emerging leaders and their development is because all too often, instead of focusing there, organizations adopt one of two unfortunate perspectives instead. The first one, a lot of organizations have talked about this and they've thought about this, but they've come to the conclusion that emerging leader development would be nice to have, but it's not something that they must have. Everybody's too busy, too focused on the tasks at hand, too constrained by budgetary or other considerations, so they just park it for someday. The second unfortunate perspective is sometimes I hear this in C-suites and in HR departments. People say, well, we don't want to invest a lot in developing people who will just leave and take their skills and talent somewhere else. Right? We don't want the people we've helped to develop to take everything we've given them over there to our competition. Now, both of these perspectives, they're really short-sighted. Both overlook the real value of developing emerging leaders. And the real value of developing your emerging leaders, it's answered by those questions that you see on screen. First of all, when you develop emerging leaders, job of retaining the talent that you already have. They don't necessarily have to go to your competition or leave your organization. In fact, people are more likely to do that when they aren't feeling fed, when they don't have the development that they're looking for with you. You see, we say that people will grow where they are planted, and it's actually just the reverse that's true. People will plant themselves where they see opportunities to grow. So if you want to retain people, think about ways that you can develop them. You know, the number one human capital concern in all those surveys out there, the Human Capital Institute, SHRM, ATD, doesn't matter. The research all concludes the same thing. The number one human capital concern is leadership development. that there aren't people inside your organization. When you think about your succession management plans, there aren't people who are ready now to ascend into those roles. But if this is the number one human capital concern, it means you're not the only one who feels that way. In fact, over 90% of executives report that very concern. And what that means is that you can't go out there and get the talent somewhere else. Everybody's scrambling and competing for the same talent that no one's developing. So if you're looking long-term instead of short-term, and you're thinking about where to find tomorrow's talent, well, the most affordable, most effective, most surefire way to be successful in doing that probably is to develop it yourself in the people that you already have on your team. You'll retain them. You'll have ready-made opportunities in the future to promote them and to really get long-term competitive advantages. When it comes to institutional knowledge and your corporate culture and making sure that your values are deeply rooted in your organization, well, the only way to have that is to have people who stick around, who model that, who nurture it, who treasure it, and who pass it along when other new people come into the organization. If everybody's new, it's really difficult to have, let alone preserve and demonstrate the culture that you need. And this is a dual benefit. When you do have a strong culture, people more easily and more profoundly have a sense of belonging. And as you know, that too helps with retention rates. One more thing to think about here. Leadership development improves employee engagement for everybody, not just for the people who are being developed. So when you have stronger leaders and development of leaders, you get a cascade of benefits. Leadership development leads to employee engagement. Employee engagement, according to all the research out there, leads to higher levels of employee retention, improved levels of productivity, that includes quality and quantity output, higher levels of customer satisfaction, as well as better top-line revenue and improved profit margins. Now, I've done a lot of webinars on this channel about employee engagement, so I'm not going to park on this very long, but I want you to go and find those webinars here on the channel and also take some of these attachments. There's a video playlist. There's tons of stats like the ones I just breezed by. There's even a tool. You can share this with all your managers. It's a daily checklist to boost employee engagement. So go get those, because that's all the time I'm going to spend on employee engagement right here and now, but it is an important factor. Now, when it comes time to identify exactly who your emerging leaders are, this is one way that a lot of organizations do it. This is the good old 9-box model. You've probably heard of it. If you haven't heard of it by that term, 9-box model, you've probably at least heard of hypo and hyper. People label folks in organizations using a 9-box model. And when somebody is hypo, hyper, that's the upper right-hand box in the model, it means that they are both a high performer in their current role, and they have demonstrated high potential for taking on additional responsibilities and growing. So sometimes in organizations, all of the emerging leaders' development dollars and attention go directly to this few who end up being identified in this box, hypo, hyper. Sometimes people decide they want to also develop folks in the other two green boxes, someone who's a moderate performer in their current role but showing high potential, or someone who's a high performer and showing moderate potential for growth. Those are the three places that most commonly emerging leaders are identified as being in. The red boxes, those are people who, for whatever reason, they are not as high performing and or not as high potential. And then the purple boxes, the ones over here on the left-hand side, when people use this 9-box model, they generally don't invest in the development of the people in the purple boxes. Now, having explained this tool, and if you aren't already using a tool like this and you want to know about it, a lot of companies do use exactly this model and process. But having said that, I want to give you full disclosure. I'm not a big fan of the 9-box model. I understand the rationale. I understand its purpose. I think that it can be an okay starting place. But I think it's really problematic if you over-rely on this model, especially if you over-rely on this model to identify and invest in emerging leaders, because you'll be leaving out a whole lot of people who might just surprise you. You can read more about that. I gave you an article about the cautions related to the 9-box model. Feel free to pick that up if you would like to know more about my provocative position on this. But I'm going to keep going. What I recommend instead is that, sure, you start with a model like this, or you start with this kind of thought process. You do want to know who are your top performers and who are the people who are already demonstrating potential. But I think there's more. And I want to give a hat tip to my friends at Flashpoint Leadership for a blog post that first stimulated this thinking for me. See, in what they're describing, you still look at the first two aspects. You still look at high performance, and you still look at high potential. You look at high performance because your emerging leaders, they're not just capable of fulfilling their current role, but they go above and beyond. They're delivering results that matter to the organization's success. In other words, they've paid their dues, and they deserve some additional support from you. And because they're already performing in their current role, you won't have to worry about things like, well, if we put them in some development program, will they still get the job done? See, they've already proved that they can get the job done, so that would alleviate your concern there. Now, you want to also think about your high potentials, because when people are seeking out extra responsibilities, or when they're already showing you that they are capable of developing new skills, well, that's a sign that there might be more that this employee could contribute. And their initiative signals to you that there could be some untapped possibilities there. So think about high performance and high potential. Do all the usual things that you would when you identify these folks. Give them stretch goals. Help them to push past the responsibilities of their current role. Test them. See what interests them. And I'll give you some additional ideas in a moment. But look, that's just 2. Now you've got more to work with. Those are just 2 out of 8 factors that you really want to look at when it comes to identifying who are the emerging leaders in your organization. You ought to look at what I described earlier, the people who are informally influencing others. That means they're already a leader even without a title or a role of authority. That influence, it doesn't necessarily mean popularity, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a squeaky wheel. What it means is that this is the person who others turn to when they have questions, the person that others sit back and watch to see what they do and how they respond before everybody else decides how to react. This is the person who has ideas, perhaps, and those ideas motivate and inspire people. It might be somebody who rallies others around, birthdays and bringing cake into the office for everyone, or who knows what. It could be something that seems insignificant, but it's an indicator to you that others pay attention to what this person is doing. Think about people who have some supervisory abilities. With or without a title, maybe they are taking charge. I think when I go into organizations, before I ever even know people, I can pretty easily spot the person who, back in high school or college, that was always the person who, no matter what, would finish the work on a project team. This person, no matter what other partners they were saddled with, this person always made sure that the work got done, even if they had to do it themselves. Now, there's a good and a bad in there. You don't want people who aren't good about delegating, but that is a learned skill. But you do want people who are really driven and looking to succeed no matter what. People who sort of put themselves in a supervisory role even when they haven't been given that authority. There might be potential there that you could mine. Let's talk about the right-hand column here. Some other things to think about as you're identifying emerging leaders. What values do they demonstrate in the work that they do? And are those values aligned with the ones that your organization prizes? Are these people who are really committed and they've worked out what they stand for? That's often a leader. Think about people who are optimistic, people who are resilient, right? These are folks who are going to always try to leave things better than they found them and are going to believe that there is something better, new, different, worth pursuing in the future. Because of that, these are people who are inspiring. Emerging leaders, they're encouraging others to grow. They're guiding people to a place they've never been before. People are willingly choosing to follow them or at least tune in to their ideas and watch what they do before deciding on their own course of action. So these are inspiring folks. And last but not least, emerging leaders, they have a desire to lead. That desire pushes them. They want to accept new challenges. They want to investigate what could be different. They aren't just complacent in the status quo. They are interested in hearing others' ideas and in trying new things. So you want to be looking for ways, because of that desire, to fan the flames they already have, the flames of an internal spark that drives them and causes others to be inspired. Anytime you can fan the flames of an internal spark, you're always going to get more, because that internal flame, it burns brighter than any fire you could ever light underneath someone. Okay, so you're assessing these 8 factors, and here's a little bit more you can work with. I've observed thousands of emerging leaders from age 8 all the way up to retirement age throughout my career. I've done a lot of work on leadership development. And I do believe that this list, which comes from another source, ERC, HR Insights, I do believe that this list of strengths and attributes is a valid one. I see this over and over and over again in people who are emerging leaders, not just people with titles and authority. So this gives you an opportunity to narrow it down even more. These are about demonstrated application of strengths and attributes, not just that someone self-declares they have these strengths, or not just people who happen to show up with these strengths on the Strengths Finder. They know how to use their strengths too. What you're looking for is behavioral evidence that an emerging leader can do more than whatever they're doing now, and that they want to invest in themselves that way. So you're identifying your emerging leaders, you're thinking broadly, not just about age, not just about already been promoted. You're thinking broadly, but you're also being discerning. Let me give you an example. I think this might help to frame up what I'm trying to describe here. Both of these individuals, they were working in the same organization, but both of them were a part of emerging leaders programs that we at People First Productivity Solutions designed and delivered in their organizations. I'm going to talk to you about Maggie and Sarah. They are both smart, talented, trustworthy. They're both personable. They're both very accomplished, and they're both ambitious. They're both hard workers. You would watch either of them and you would say, you know, Those are people who seem to accomplish more by 10 a.m. than most people do in a full day. Now, Maggie, she describes herself as risk-averse, responsible, reflective, and a good soldier. These are her words. She strongly prefers to let other people make decisions and then tell her what to do, and then she will execute flawlessly and quickly every single time. By contrast, Sarah describes herself as creative, adventurous, curious, and an innovator. And she strongly prefers opportunities where she can experiment and take risks without someone looking over her shoulder. Now, both of them, both Maggie and Sarah, they both needed to stretch themselves to become highly effective leaders and to grow into management roles. Ultimately, only one of them succeeded. And of course, that was Sarah. And it's because Maggie had no experience and no comfort level and no desire to build the behaviors related to activating, implementing change, making independent decisions, and she especially had no tolerance for potentially failing. To her, that was the worst case scenario. So she decided that she was very happy in a contributor role. She's still informally a leader. She still influences others. She still isn't trusted with execution of projects. But when it comes to leadership, breaking new ground, taking people to new places, that was much more up Sarah's alley. And sometimes that happens. So emerging leaders, it's not just all of your high performance, high potential people. Sometimes because of strengths and attributes, leadership will end up not being for everyone. Okay, so what do? Once you've identified these emerging leaders, it's time to think about retaining and motivating them. Now, your pool, as we talked about a moment ago, your pool may be larger than you think, so you want to seize the opportunities of having that larger pool and retain and motivate and develop as many of them as you can. And what I'm showing you on screen, these are items that will develop emerging leaders, and in doing so, will simultaneously motivate them and increase the likelihood that you'll retain them in your organization. These are all no-cost things to do. You could do any of this. You could, as I said earlier, you could provide training. I've given you free email training in the attachments, and it is good. It's been around for about 7 or 8 years. A lot of people have completed that training, and it's been something that's been transformational for people and for organizations who have asked multiple people to go through that little simple email free training. So take advantage of that. You can also do training, even very informally, brown bag kind of sessions about what it means to be a leader. There are so many good resources out there that will help you to give that kind of a training. I gave you a couple of ebooks here that would help you get started. I strongly recommend the book, Learning Leadership. That's by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. There are many, many other resources just on the idea of what does it even mean to be a leader? And especially people who want to know that the company is investing in them and cares about them as a leader, no matter what their job level. That kind of training is very, very high value. Now, practically speaking, it's not just about putting people in a classroom. You can give people stretch assignments. You can give them development activities. You can give them oversight of a project. You can put them on a cross-functional team. And with any of those practical day-to-day assignments, you're going to people what they do when they are faced with ambiguity, how they exercise those strengths of activating, and are they willing to take some risks? Will they innovate? There's so much that you can find out about people if you give them opportunities like these. And as you're giving them those opportunities, remember, they're feeling like you're investing in them. They're more likely to be motivated, and retention rates go up when people have these kinds of opportunities. Last but not least is mentoring. because mentoring internally makes a lot of sense. Hopefully you've set up some opportunities for people to find mentors in your organization, and equally important, hopefully you've also given people at every level opportunities to mentor others. Remember, mentoring, it's not about managing. It's not the same as coaching. Mentors simply have a superior level of technical expertise in one narrow area. So someone could be a mentor in, Excel spreadsheets and be the very newest person in your company. It's just that they know more than everybody else about all the functionality of Excel spreadsheets. So they become a mentor. They teach others. They're developing themselves as a leader as they do that. So look for opportunities and try to mix that up, down, all around. Mentoring is not just top down. We do need to talk about retention. So here's a reminder. This is from Gallup's research. This is that same research you've probably seen in a dozen other formats, but it always comes to the same conclusion. The top 4 reasons that people leave a job are all driven by the manager. It's up to the manager to help people fit in, to feel supported, to see that pathway to success, and to get feedback about how they can improve. Managers typically do all of this work, and when they don't, people leave. So to retain your high potentials, your high performers, the other people that you're identifying based on the qualities I've offered you here, the things to look at, your emerging leaders, they also need this. They crave this. They want to know how they can be successful. They want to know how they can advance and improve. They want to feel supported, and they want to fit in, not just short term because of a job they have today, but long term. They want to see the bigger picture and how they can contribute to the overall mission of the organization. So your managers, they bear some responsibility here. And you do too if you've never given them the tools or the understanding about how to do this work of engaging people and helping them. So retention, it is an issue. And retention is linked to development, and development is linked to the manager. All the pieces start to come together. Let me give you a couple of quotes from research that explain this a little bit further. See, these are some pretty big numbers. More than 1/3 of your workforce might jump ship if they don't have opportunities to advance or opportunities to develop. So that's why this is so keenly important. Your managers need to be able to show them the way and to create some opportunities that give them space to develop. Now, your managers also need to know how to motivate people. So let's jump to part 3 here. What I'm showing you now are some fundamentals of motivation. Basically, there are 2 types of motivation. I mentioned them earlier. You can light a fire underneath someone, and you can make that fire pretty hot. No matter how hot you make it, it's always going to be extrinsic. It comes from outside the individual. Most of the extrinsic motivation, you're using it because these are the methods that have historically been used. You're going to give someone a pay raise. They're going to get a bad performance review. They might go on a performance improvement plan. There's something, some box they have to check, some KPIs that they have to meet, and we're expecting that to be sufficient motivation for them. But it's all from external. What we're missing oftentimes is the opportunity to motivate people at a deeper level. That's intrinsic motivation. That's motivation that comes from inside someone. We can't put motivation inside someone, but we can understand what motivation already exists for them, what that little spark is of something they're interested in, something they care about, something that is, for them, a stronger motivator than all the stuff we can do externally. And when we know what that spark is, we can fan that flame. and that spark will burn brighter, and it will last longer, and it will go everywhere that person goes, even when a manager is not looking over their shoulder or not holding up some sort of carrot or stick. So intrinsic motivation, that's pretty important when it comes to your emerging leaders or anybody on your team, frankly. You might want to look toward intrinsic motivation more often. I've mapped it out here just to try to help you see some of the differences. So a little box model. Basically, there are 4 different ways to motivate people. You are most familiar in the workplace with the 2 on the left. These are extrinsic motivators, negative on the bottom in dark purple, positive on the upper left. And it's the kinds of things that we say that are outside an individual, whether it's carrot, a reward that we're dangling, or whether it's stick, a threat that we're making or implying, a fear of a consequence that we're putting out there. Right? Those are all extrinsic. Somebody else wants it. Somebody else is pushing you because of this thing that they want to see happening. But on the right-hand side, less often used and so much more powerful is intrinsic. And it too can be positive or negative, but it comes from inside the individual. It comes from inside the individual based on what they like to do, based on their own personal goals and their own personal interests. Do they want to buy a house? And so right now they're saving up their money and they need to make as much money as possible to live that dream. Do they really, really care about being responsible and making sure that they never disappoint somebody? It's going to be different for everyone, but when a manager understands an individual's intrinsic motivation, and when you think about your emerging leaders and how to give them the best, most fruitful development opportunities, well, finding out what intrinsically motivates them is often a good place to start. You can do that by observing people. You can also do it by simply asking them, what makes you dive into your work? What are the things that you enjoy most? What would make your work more meaningful to you? And people will tell you. And then that's something that's important to know, and you can utilize it in so many ways. Now, let me just come back to extrinsic motivation for just a moment, because I don't want to make this seem like an either-or choice. Extrinsic motivation actually has some downsides to it, some drawbacks. First of all, it's not sustainable. As soon as you withdraw the punishment or the reward, the motivation evaporates too. So you just have to keep upping the ante when it's all about extrinsic motivation. That's not sustainable. Not only that, but you're going to get diminishing returns. Right? There's going to be a gradual and a persistent decline in motivation, even if the rewards or the punishment are unchanged. That means that to stay at the same level of motivation, you actually have to increase the reward or the punishment or the frequency with which you're talking about it. And that's where people sometimes slip into micromanaging. Sometimes it's where organizations lose their spirit and their culture because it's been so much focus on extrinsic motivation. Worst of all, by extrinsically motivating someone, you might actually be taking away their own intrinsic motivation. And that's what that quote on screen is all about. When you reward someone or when you punish someone for doing something, it supplants, it removes their own innate desire to do it on their own for their own reasons. Without meaning to, you interfere with their desire to do what you want them to do. So let me give you a little bit more about that because it's a pretty important concept. What I'm saying is that you can accidentally diminish someone's intrinsic motivation if you are overly focused on extrinsic motivators or if you're not taking the individual into account. I'll give you an example of this. It's a personal example. My entire life I have loved writing. and I do a lot of it. But when I went to school as an English major and journalism major, I lost my love of writing. I had to do it for someone else, on deadlines, in certain ways, and it became a job. It became a chore. And my intrinsic motivation, my writing just for the joy of writing, became somebody else's task that I had to do. And I eventually stopped writing. I did not pursue journalism as a career. I have worked in media for a lot of years, but not as a journalist. And I only recently, about 7 years ago, rediscovered that I could write just for me. It's so much more fun now than it used to be. That can happen to anybody with any kind of work. So if you want the people around you to be intrinsically motivated in a way that can be sustained, if you want your emerging leaders to have high levels of motivation, which then inspires others and churns up leadership in your entire culture, if you want that, then you have to offer them ways to be intrinsically motivated. You have to create the environment and the opportunity for these things to happen. So you might just use this list as a checklist. How many of those factors are in place for the people in your team or in your organization? And what could you do to embed more of these intrinsic motivators, these environment enablers of intrinsic motivation? How could you make sure that these are in place more often? And let me point out that I've already given you part of that answer. I showed you a slide earlier with some circles on it about things that you could do to help your emerging leaders get development opportunities. That was the cross-functional team assignments, for example. It included doing some mentoring, having some project oversight, some stretch assignments. All of those things are going to provide challenge and control, cooperation, opportunities for recognition, feeling good about the work, which presumably leads to happiness and certainly lets people know that you trust them. So you can get some double advantages by doing all this together. You know, intrinsic motivation, it's really powerful. And this is ultimately what we're after, to motivate people, to help them to want to stay with your organization longer. Once you've identified them out of that great big pool, you're not limiting yourself. Once you do that, you're going to have residual benefits. And people are going to fuel this for each other, with each other. It's going to continue to build on itself and become a multiplier in your organization. It's really powerful. So think about not just how to identify and retain, but absolutely be thinking about how to motivate your emerging leaders. Now, here are some next steps that you can take. We've covered an awful lot of ground here, and I'd like you to be in touch with me if you have any follow-up questions. I have answered the ones that were posted here in the live session along the way, but I know many of you will listen later on demand. So anytime, just give me a call, shoot me an email, let's get your questions answered. Be sure and link in with me on LinkedIn. But these are some next steps to consider. And not all of these have big price tags attached to them. Every one of them, though, is a smart investment in not just those emerging leaders, but in everybody in your organization and the long-term health of your organization. There's nothing here on this list that doesn't pay back big, big dividends. And if you're concerned about how to make the business case for leadership development, how to get other people to think about that and to see the value, well, I gave you some information about that too. I've done webinars here on this channel about it. I have some website information for you about it. You can look at any of my ebooks. They always have a chapter about how to make sure you take these ideas to the C-suite. And of course, I'm happy to help. So just give me a call. Let me know what you need. We'll talk it through, and hopefully you'll get some answers and some forward motion, because this is extremely important, not just for the emerging leaders, but for everyone in your organization.